I'm just going to jump in to Rethinking the Out-of-Home Marketplace. Welcome all of you. My name is Jill Montaigne, and I am the president of Original Spark, and we are the firm that actually conducted the primary research that was alluded to this morning by Rashad and who was it? Tell me, I'm blanking out on his name. Who was our first? Nick, yeah. That they alluded to this morning on what's the status of what's happening in the out-of-home marketplace. So I just want to start by, there's so few of us in this room, it's going to be, I could basically learn everybody's name in the 45 minutes we're in here. I just want to start by asking you guys, show me kind of with your hands, thumbs up or thumbs down, how credible or how much you believed this morning when they were telling you how out-of-home is so kind of, to use a better word, hot right now. Show me with your hands. So everybody, you guys are wild optimists. Everybody was believing, because I was listening thinking, well, this is really a conference for out-of-home because it's like rah, rah, rah. But I'm here to tell you that that is actually the reality of how advertisers are thinking about the marketplace today. So we did this study. It took 2 months. We did first qualitative interviews with 18 individuals who represented a broad cross-section of categories. And then based on everything that we heard from those in-depth interviews, and we spent about an hour talking to each advertiser, we then did a quantitative study so that we could really dig deeper on the themes that we heard. And these are all projectable studies, so what we learned, you can actually clearly rely on. And what we heard was that out-of-home is, to use a phrase from the advertisers, out-of-home is actually the cool kid again. And we thought that that was really incredible, just hearing it talked about that way. And it was many of the reasons that were cited this morning in the main plenary session, that out-of-home bypasses all the digital noise. What someone said to me is it enables us to have a very different relationship with the consumer than any other advertising that we do, which I thought was really remarkable. They all talked about the fact that it creates the buzz, ignites conversation, but that it confers relevance on their brand. So they're looking at themselves as borrowing from this medium instead of leveraging it in some way. And the last is, of course, geo-targeting, which we know is critically important and only getting more important as time goes on. When we ask them to sum up what out-of-home is in one word, these are the words that people used. And I want to draw your attention to them. Unique and important, on trend and epic and wow. So these aren't words that you are using to describe your industry. These are words that advertisers are using to describe your industry. So it really speaks to the dynamism of what's going on today in your category. You have all made tremendous strides over the past 5 years to really improve what you're doing, and that comes in many forms. It comes in the forms of new options that you're giving advertisers. These guys up here all represent different options than existed a mere 5 years ago, and the quantity of options that people have available to them. Advertisers now recognize that there are many fewer barriers to entry to come into this than they used to be, where it used to be just so cumbersome, and some of that still exists, but they realize that the bar's coming down. We talked about programmatic so many times in terms of what it conveys to advertisers and what it enables them to do. And so marketers all say that it's much easier, there's much less friction in the experience now, and it becomes increasingly more flexible. So you would look at that, and I can say to all of you guys, does that mean, is the money pouring in? Like, have you noticed this year that your people you're calling on, they've just opened up their budgets and they said to you, you guys are it. No more network television. We're giving you 100% of the budget. Exactly. So there's really nothing to talk about. So we know that the reality is they're saying all this great stuff about us, but somehow the walk and the talk are not matching each other. And so let's talk about why that is. We know that there is a lack of industry standardization. And that's because we have so many competitors all kind of doing things in their own and unique way, clearly presenting problems for marketers. We know that there is a lack of industry accountability because you're not all adhering to the same standards. Programmatic is leaning in the right direction, but advertisers are still saying it doesn't enable them to develop scale and specific audience targeting quickly enough. And the last point, and the one that we're going to talk about today, is go-to-market strategies. The way all of the companies are approaching advertisers is falling short. And that's going to be what our topic is today. I am thrilled to introduce three panelists today. We have Michael Rosen. Michael, wave your hand. Michael is the Chief Revenue Officer of Intersection, which was founded on the concept of transforming people's everyday journeys with the enrichment of relevant and entertaining information. Gilad Amitai, and I hope I'm selling everyone's companies properly, is the COO and founder of Ubimo, a leading location intelligence platform serving the market with data and insights on consumer movement. And lastly, but only because it's in order, and I'm glad you're sitting in the middle, is Mike Schott. And Mike is the Senior Vice President of Volta Industries, which designs, manufactures, installs, and maintains a network of free electric ad-supported charging stations. So today, we're going to start by talking about the first issue that advertisers brought up, and that is, contrary to the fact that we are in the data panel, advertisers said they're spending too much time talking about data and not enough time talking about the consumer. And so I want to ask each of you now to talk about what does it mean to put the consumer front and center, and how are you doing that?
So, hey everyone, happy Tuesday afternoon in Vegas.
I don't know if yours is on.
All right. There we go. Hello, there we go. Happy Tuesday afternoon in Vegas. My first OAAA, so excited to be here. So it's interesting, when you think about actually consumers, because there's been a lot of talk today about a lot of things from programmatic to consumers to value. I actually believe that consumers are at front and center of what we're doing specifically, and I think with a lot of other folks in the industry, and it really starts with content, context, utility, and experiences. So if you think about making sure that you're providing content or utility for those consumers who are actually engaging with your products, I think that's really important. Some examples, for private communities like Hudson Yards, making sure that you're actually giving people wayfinding to find those stores, reservations so they can engage and actually make reservations, and giving them yet utility and content. On the public streets of New York City, we're actually a publisher. So we're actually providing content that has nothing to do with advertising, although it can certainly be sponsored, but it's about tips and art and things that actually make people engage with the content. And then experiences in general, being able to provide these amazing experiences when you're in transit, and also understanding from a content perspective, is the train late? What's happening there? Is there an emergency? Do I need to contact someone? To me, that is more important than the advertising from a standpoint of if you don't do that, it's hard to actually engage with a consumer. So I would say that's a really important part.
So I'm going to push back just a little bit on that, Michael, and just say that's the story of the connection you have with the consumer.
Yeah.
How are you conveying that story effectively to the advertiser?
Well, I think it's really about, first of all, educating those advertisers, because I think typically or traditionally in out-of-home that hasn't been the case, right? So I think making sure that we're out there telling that story. And I think also the wonderful thing are our CMOs are also consumers. And I think those who experience it, who are commuting or who are walking the city streets or who are going to charging stations, I mean they're seeing that and they're understanding it. So I think it's also up to us in the industry to educate and tell that. But also we have consumers who engage in that content. Right, so it's we can actually tell a brand of here are the people who are making restaurant reservations. Here are the people who are wayfinding on in Chicago in the CTA to kind of see how to get from point A to point B. In aggregate, we can talk about those engagements so that the facts don't lie.
Mike?
Yeah, I would say I agree with all that, and people are flocking to the EV charging stations. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I think there's some confusion between data or consumer centric. I mean, I think data is foundational. anything that we are doing to approach or to target or to identify consumers is rooted in data. And so, and Rashad's really good about, not only today, but in you know, if anyone follows him and knows where his mind is, you know, he has a data background, but a lot of times he's saying, our jobs can't start and end with data. Data's foundational. We use that to identify audiences. And I think that's something where, as I hear these things, it seems like it's an either or, and that's absolutely not the way we look at it. And I know it's not the way Gilad looks at it, so I'll give you a shot at this.
Also my first OAAA, so excited. It's amazing. I think it's all about relevancy. So data is not important to itself. Data is a way for us to understand how a brand can be relevant for its consumers, how a media owner can be relevant for the consumers, because I agree with Michael, like basically, Out of Home is a publisher. Like Link NYC is basically like a newspaper open in the street in New York, and if it's beautiful and if it's relevant and if it provides content that consumers like, brands want to be there and talk with their consumers and enjoying it. So it's not about data, it's about being relevant. Data helps us be relevant.
So I just want to reiterate that I think it's really important. You guys are all making really good and critical points. But I think it's really important to remember when advertisers are saying you're not leading with the consumer, that it's really about connecting the data with stories so that they can hold on to what it is you are trying to tell them. They know the data is there. They know that ultimately their agency is going to be vetting the data. But until you bring it alive for them in a way that's really telling your story in a compelling way through how it's intersecting with the consumer, the advertiser, I think, is still going to feel that gap a little bit. Right now, the second thing that advertisers talked about is that sales teams tend to be focused on attributes and selling. You're leading with location. You're talking about where the location of the physical properties actually might be, instead of helping marketers with solutions and benefits. And again, we heard that mentioned this morning in the plenary session. How can we take information that's so critical, like location, but help marketers use it in a more strategic way?
So I think first of all, location, the way I look at it is location is like kind of like the cookie of the physical world, right? You know, like this industry is now transforming itself from being like a location-based, property-based industry to an audience-based industry. And location is a way for us to basically connect other data sets. And when I'm saying that location is a cookie, we, for example, at Ubimo and also my colleagues here are using location to understand which type of consumers are exposed to what type of properties and change the conversation from this property is in proximity to a McDonald's to this property is exposed to morning commuters that consume Mac coffee in the morning.
Yeah, and the call is for the consumer journey, right? That's what people want. That's the storytelling. And we all, you know, where we have locations that we can address people and tell that story of the consumer journey, that is all rooted in location. And so, you know, one of the reasons I jumped into this opportunity 2.5 years ago was in every traditional medium, they've made the claim that they are the perfect companion to mobile. In broadcast, it was always, well, Nielsen has a study, 60% of TV viewers have another device in their hand. And even the print guys say, hey, if you see this print ad, if you click the QR code, it brings it to life, and it's a magical experience on your device. The fact that mobile is obviously rooted in location, and our industry is rooted in location, it makes it really the perfect partnership. And I think that it's this opportunity that we have that begins to tell the story. So it's not an industry that's saying, I have this board in this zip code, and the way to target the audience is the demographic of that zip code, because that's obviously a very loose proxy. So now we have the ability to say, the story's being told that if someone is having a daily pattern, that we have the ability. I once got an opportunity to talk about the political elite in DC, and how do we target those people? Well, it's kind of a brain bender for most mediums, but in our world we can say, well, we can identify all the people that are spending their day at the Capitol, and we can find out where they live, we can find out how they traverse to the Capitol, and it's a brilliant opportunity to tell a really compelling story.
So I think, like a lot of words that we've heard today, there's multiple meanings. So location, I kind of look at it as, I want to buy this board or this kiosk in a certain corner, right? And that's kind of, I think, legacy, traditional. And then it's using location in aggregate to target audiences, right? So I think that part of location is key to everything that we're doing, and I think that the industry is doing. I think there's three key things that you can use that location for, right? So first, you're using it to find the right audience or find insights about that audience to, to convince a marketer or a specialist to buy. Then it's making sure that the creative is contextually relevant, right? So again, they're mutually, they're not exclusive. And then also, what is the attribution or measurement to actually say that that can be successful? So I think location at the core is important to all this, but it's about audience, it's about context, and then it's about measurement. And so, two examples, because I want to make sure we're given some examples. On the contextually relevant use of location, so with Avengers Endgame, we were able to actually do, the day of the premiere on Friday, understand proximity to physical theaters and actually do 2 hours before the premiere, go get your ticket, go watch this, and it was in the proximity. So again, location can influence that, but it wasn't about please buy this Link kiosk near it was really influencing and looking at the audience habits and kind of proximity with theaters. And then on the measurement side, what's really cool also about using location in aggregate is being able to actually, through programmatic mechanisms, actually measure if you can actually drive a digital event. So for example, with DraftKings, which is a client of ours, we were actually able to take static media and dominations in stations in New Jersey and actually use programmatic pipes to actually measure that it drove a 51% increase in registrations for that domination campaign. But we couldn't have done that without understanding the location and kind of the audience data that comes. So that's really critical.
Really using it strategically. It was very ironic that marketers talked about out-of-home conferring this patina of relevance and excitement on their brands, and yet, soon as budgets get tight, out-of-home becomes one of the first on the chopping block. We're always seen as kind of a throwaway partner rather than long-term. And I'm wondering, from your guys' perspective, what can we do to start really firming up those bonds so that advertisers see us as integral to what their mission is rather than just tangential to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can think of it as we look at it as three stakeholders that we generally talk to. We talk to the client, the agency of record, or the out-of-home buying shop, and those are generally a good rule of thumb. Sometimes within the AOR there are a number of brand teams where there's integration, but within that we have to be able to seamlessly fit into that conversation, particularly at the AOR when they're building strategy. We need the same KPIs as what they are looking at. And so that starts with programmatic. Now we can be looked at as, even though we're a one-to-many, we can be transacted through pipes that are integrated with digital. And then obviously the mobile component is the other opportunity that it unlocks, the device ID that we grab in a geofence situation unlocks so many things. We can talk, there's been so much talk about attribution and how that's a critical piece, but I think attribution we hear more often than anything else is we need to be able to go back to our clients and show the effectiveness. And while we've been aggressive with brand studies, time and time again, we were talking beforehand, there aren't a lot of brand studies that don't turn out pretty rosy. And the ones that aren't maybe are only not rosy in comparison to the best ones that you've had. So the opportunity is right in front of us to really take that step, because if you look and feel and act like digital, but you can be transacted and bought without all of the hang-ups with digital, whether it's viewability or ad blocking or non-human traffic, or we can list them all. The opportunity is massive there. So I think that we need to be looked at as not a separate piece of the buy or incremental, but that holistic piece.
I think one of the biggest problems of the out-of-home industry, it's still outside of the omnichannel mix. So the reason it's being cut first when you need to cut a budget is that, think about the CMO that just invested 10 years in digital and built his marketing cloud strategy and pay Salesforce millions of dollars every year to harvest this data. But he cannot use this data for out-of-home. And it doesn't matter if this data is good data or bad data, this is the data that the CMO trusts because this is the data that is built. And today when they buy social they use this data, they buy video, they use this data, they buy digital, they use this data, even connected TV, they use this data. Out-of-home is still very much out of that data. And what we've started to see recently, and I think it's an encouragement to the industry, is the ability to now allow those marketers to bring inside their first-party data or second-party data that they trust to buy, plan, and measure out-of-home. And by doing that, I predict that we'll be able to change a bit the paradigm of having out-of-home kind of like the first medium that's being cut out, because they will trust the data, they will be able to measure the data, it will really be part of their omni-channel mix. So this is one aspect to that, and the second one also goes to reach. When they're doing like kind of like, you know, media mix planning, even today out-of-home, although we have geopaths and we have good reach and good measurement, there's still a currency issue in the industry. And there's also an issue matching that currency to the currency the brands are familiar or the marketers are familiar using for basically measuring how much of their audiences they're actually reaching. So by consolidating that and creating more kind of like a standardized currency, we'll be able to overcome this actually quite hurting problem.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think also, you know, we talked about this with Nick and Rashad this morning too, is that there's this perception that, you know, certainly out of home has been always that top of the funnel. And I think now with, you know, what you mentioned and certainly what, you know, what other programmatic companies like Place Exchange and others are doing, you know, we can now be able to actually help marketers achieve other parts of the funnel through conversion and, you know, consideration. So I actually think that for us, you know, that discussion about, you know, certainly entertainment, right? There's the reason why, you know, you need to promote your talent in, you know, on Sunset Boulevard, but it's also really about, you know, going to that client, going to that marketer, and actually having a deep, rich discussion about what she or he wants to do. And, you know, I think that's something that more and more, because, you know, as you reported, we're having a moment, we have that opportunity to do, and I don't think anyone in this room should shy away from that, to have that discussion before you start, you know, talking about, you know, a proximity of a board or, you know, just trying to commoditize what we're doing. I think there's value in what we're doing, but it also only is based on what we can achieve if we can achieve their marketing goals.
So that kind of leads to a sensitive topic, and that topic is your actual relationship with the advertiser. It's been, at least historically, somewhat challenging for people in this industry to establish those critical relationships because advertisers tend to push you off to either agency or specialists. And I'm wondering, knowing that, and knowing that that relationship is really a critical piece, and the way that traditional media has been able to lock in those budgets, what do you see as the strategies to actually make that happen, and so that you can change the relationship paradigm over the next couple of years?
No, so I'll go back to my point earlier, like, you know, at least for us at UBIM, like, we're trying to get closer to the advertising marketer by basically allowing them to bring their data directly to the out-of-home industry. So this goes back to the reason we're sitting here and talking about data is like, if I'm a marketer and I can use my data for buying this channel, it makes the conversation a direct conversation. Like, there will always be agencies or consultants or specialists in the way, but if the data conversation will be direct, and if, like, you know, Michael's team will speak with an advertiser and the data will be the kind of the common language they're using for that, there will be a direct conversation. So yeah. So
I actually don't think it's a sensitive topic. I think that, you know, they're looking for solutions, right? And there's a lot of confusion out there, right? And I come from, you know, programmatic, you know, history kind of at other companies, and, you know, we have to be careful about not making this too confusing, but also, again, making sure we're just being laser focused about, you know, what we can provide value to. And I think the hard part is, you know, in this ecosystem of out of home, you know, we have small companies who maybe have, you know, one or two billboards. You have, you know, massive companies, you know, who have, you know, massive scale. And so, you know, I think that on one hand, the programmatic, you know, kind of SSPs are kind of being able to kind of aggregate that and provide value at scale. But I think also, you know, the likes of Intersection and others, you know, there's definitely a need to be able to, you know, get out in mass and reach those consumers. And so I don't think it's such a sensitive thing. I think it's like all the things we've been talking about today and even on this panel, we just have to do more of it. And I would say also, are there any marketers in the room? There's two. You know, I think that.
Stand up and tell us what everyone thinks.
But I think, you know, it's also what I've seen in other, you know, I was happy to see some marketers, you know, today, but in you know, the 4As and in other conferences, there are a lot of marketers in the room. So, I think it's also indicative of us to, bring marketers in, to ask them those questions, and also to ask those hard questions, right? And to hear from them. So that's what we're doing, and so that we can learn and we can get better in that. We can provide them solutions that make sense. And by the way, sometimes they don't make sense, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and I would say the customer data is awesome. Keeping it simple is great. I think it's also, it comes back to storytelling. I mean, I think everybody, yes, there's pressure on CMOs, but the pressure is never waned for a good idea. And for us, we come, Volta specifically, and I know to a certain extent Michael does this as well, we say our platform is new and unique, and there's more and more in our industry now of new and unique platforms where the brand is really focused on the brand. And sometimes the messages we have will never hit closer to home than when you're talking to the actual client and going all the way up the ladder, maybe most relevant to the CMO. And I think it was Nick this morning who touched on the idea that marketing with purpose is one of the new paradigms, that brands can't just stand for selling you a product or a service. They need to stand for something more than that. And so by sponsoring something more than just a billboard gives brands the opportunity to say, I can have an incredible placement for my CPG product as people are walking into a grocery store, but I can also earn this halo effect of being having the perception, building the perception that I'm committed to the community, to the environment. So I think we all have to challenge ourselves to figure out what is our story and differentiate ourselves.
So one of the other things that came up when we were talking to advertisers is if I ask advertisers what broadcast television is, everybody's really clear what that is, what it means, and who the players are. If I ask them who the digital players are, they can name them. Everybody gave a very different definition of what out-of-home means, and that's because so many in the industry are communicating out-of-home differently to advertisers that you're creating your own level of confusion and cloudiness. What's the way that we can all get on the same page about what out-of-home means and how we're defining it so we can make it easier for advertisers to embrace it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a massive transition that's happening really quickly. 2 years ago, we weren't asking our salespeople to talk about mobile and geofencing and programmatic and now attribution. I mean, these are things that unless you have some experience in, you can't just fake it. Otherwise, your message will not be heard and you're going to miss the point. So I think it's a matter of being cohesive with our story, not only as individual vendors, but as an industry, and then also standardization around how programmatic is growing and how it's hitting the market, because everybody has a different angle based on their own unique offerings. So I think those are two key things that will really help kind of demystify this.
I'm actually surprised. I actually think there's a lot of alignment. In kind of some of the panels I was at before, I think there's a lot. Everyone's trying to figure out, right? We're growing at 4.5%. We're having a moment. Marketers are asking more about what we're doing. So I actually think there's a lot of alignment. The reality is, whether you're a specialist or a media publisher or a vendor, right? We all have our businesses to run, right? So to Rashad, I thought was dead on when he said, how do you deal with today and then plan for the future, and you got to do it together. And I think that's what we're all trying to figure out. But I think there's also some really interesting. I think it's natural to have companies be talking differently, and I think you think about some of the bigger issues that I think this industry is facing, especially on the digital out-of-home side, getting rid of the loop and going to impression-based buying, trying to attract video dollars, figuring out the audience-based measurement side of Geopath, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that I think to your point, we're trying to do this really quickly and do a lot of it. So I actually, being a newbie here in the out-of-home, I think we're doing good, and I think we're only kind of getting better in what we do.
I think actually the fact that it's starting to be very hard to define out-of-home is a very positive sign. Because 20 years ago, it was a billboard, right? Even 5 years ago, it was a billboard. And today we have Volta charging stations, Link NYC, we have transportation, we have emerging platforms. Like, out-of-home is everywhere. This is why everybody is talking about video everywhere and conversation everywhere. So I see it as a positive sign. The fact that we are not anymore kind of like the billboard industry, it's a very good sign. And we don't need to be afraid of a complexity of explaining that out-of-home is not just a billboard anymore, and it's like a medium that basically together with mobile, is probably the most consistent medium of having a conversation with consumers. So I think it's a great sign, actually.
I like that very confident approach. Rashad also talked about one other thing that I hope all you guys heard this morning, and that is the idea that as print has pretty much fallen away, which was once clearly a mass medium, and television, specifically cable, I guess, and broadcast, are both being threatened by new models, that the reality is out of home may be the last man standing and the true only mass medium left for advertisers, which is really incredible when you think about that, particularly as an opportunity. He also then said, out of home has created jet engines, but continues selling it as locomotives. And so my question is, how are we getting into the jet engine business, since that's really the power that we're sitting on today?
That's a good one.
My first good one?
Oh yeah, that's it. That's all.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I mean, I think there's always going to be, there's always a place for other industries and mediums, right? So, you know, I think that all the things we're saying, you know, when I think about what Rashad's talking about, and you think about what out-of-home can do, you know, I actually think about, we saw a lot of slides about disruption. I think we were counting, I think there were like, you know, 15 different slides with disruption. And so, you know, I'll talk about disruption. You know, you think about the average consumer is, you know, their attention span is what, 8 seconds? You know, the kind of the digital native or digital savvy person, you know, they're going to 20, they're switching mediums 27 times, you know, a minute, not a minute, an hour, 27 times an hour. So I mean, there's a lot of you know, just noise, right? And there's a lot of competition. So, you know, when you think about what out of home is, and it's being able to, you know, stop what you're doing, look up, experience things in the real world, I think that's a great jet engine.
I'll take a slightly different approach. I think, you know, the quote that you used earlier is talking about out of home as a medium for the masses, right? From the other side, you're having brands trying to have like a one-to-one conversation with clients or with consumers, and I think this is confusing us a bit because we need to remember that out of home is a mass medium and it's not a one-to-one medium. And this is also where I think we need to work close with the marketers to advise them on that and remind them that this is not social where they're trying to have like a one-to-one conversation. This is a mass personalization medium, and the creative and the conversation needs to be around that. And by doing that, I think you can actually have a good conversation.
Well, that, you know, it's interesting, right? Like you think about your let's say we're sitting with that CMO, and you know, here's how the conversation goes. Like, you know, can you?
I'll be the CMO.
Right, you know, can we do one-to-one? We want to be able to take, you know, mobile, we want you to pass by a board and we want to target you on mobile. And I think that's where the industry, like there's things that we should be comfortable to say, that's not what this is for. So, you know, that's going to be the rub because there's going to be companies that are competing for share and are going to say, oh, we can do this, right? So, you know, I think that's a great point, and we just have to be, you know, really kind of thoughtful about privacy and about, you know, about just understanding consumers as they walk the city streets, which is very different than perhaps how they're using a mobile device.
This is also where, as an industry, we have actually an advantage on the rest, because the fact that it's not a one-to-one medium, from a privacy, from a brand perspective, like there's lots of concerns that can basically be resolved very easy early in the conversation. So, yeah.
And yet, with the device ID, we have a singular, anonymous, but deterministic data point. And I think that is where we have that, it is a magical benefit. We're marketing the masses, but we can give attribution at a singular level. And whether it's Gilead's first-party data, or Volta's first-party data, or Michael's, or, you know, there are third parties like Accretive Media who has a registered user database that you can match to. We can get to the point where a consumer is exposed to a brand ad on a station in front of a grocery store, a Volta station or whatever. We can measure, did they or did they not go in the store and actually make that SKU level purchase in that same session, or did they go to a different grocery store and make that purchase? And I think that is maybe not today, but that is something that we absolutely have the capability of. And so marketing to the masses but giving attribution at that level is a killer value prop.
So I want to open it up to you guys. If you have questions either about the research specifically or about any of the companies and the properties that these gentlemen are all representing, or about the topics that we discussed? Please raise your hands. Oh, you're going to make it really hard for me? Not one question. Okay, I'm going to continue with my questions then. You're stuck. You guys have all come from very different industries before you came to Out of Home. Tell me the primary lesson that you're bringing with you that you learned from a past life in terms of how you are now approaching Out of Home today.
Do we have another hour? I mean, I think there's a whole bunch. I maybe think about a couple, or maybe more than a couple, but I'll do quick. So, you know, because we have a lot of different audiences in the room, you know, I think first off, don't talk about, CMOs don't want to see your 40-page deck, right? They want to see, you know, they want to talk about their solutions. So, you know, that's kind of a no-brainer, but that's important. I think for anyone looking at a data vendor, a location company, you know, anything, it's like, ask questions, right? Really understand where is the company getting the data, how are they using it, give me use cases, real world examples of how that location lives in the real world. I think that's really important, especially coming from the location space at Foursquare. It's like, ask those questions, don't assume anything. And then really the last one is, you know, let's not be afraid of, you know, the goodness of digital and the goodness of programmatic. But, you know, again, to me, it's just one part of it. It's really, you know, starting with that marketer.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, if you are fortunate to get the time of a CMO, we have to take things a little differently. I mean, I think that for anyone who's familiar with an approach like the Challenger sale, we need to put the pressure on ourselves to know a lot about their business. Now, that is it's a high bar when they say you need to know something about their business that they don't even know about their own business. But I think the old solution selling approach, if I'm going to go in and I'm going to have a list of questions and learn what keeps you up at night, that doesn't work anymore. And kudos to anyone who gets the time of a CMO, because that means you had some kind of a good idea or something that got that attention. But I think the stakes are really high for us to go in there and say, here's what I know about your business, here's what I know about your competitive set, and here's what I can offer that hopefully no one else can offer. I think that's something that we see. And it's a high bar, but I think that's what we have to do in those instances.
For me, actually, it was coming to Out of Home from digital was the biggest lesson was that it's a very local business. Like it's just my experience, you come from digital with one platform, one audience, nationwide. And Out of Home is a very, very local business. And this, I think, was like, for me, like a great learning and lesson and something I'm trying to actually, like, you know, evolve myself from.
So I would add actually one more thing to what you said. It's also, you know, we all kind of come from digital in one way, shape, or form, and you know, for me, it was coming in and making sure that we honor and bring the really good things about the out-of-home space to what we're doing, and not to assume that, you know, the digital side is getting this right. So, you know, being able to merge the best of both to service our clients and our specialists and our planning and buying agencies.
So these conferences are part of the reason that we like to attend them is because sometimes we hear new news. So you guys all take 30 seconds. Tell us what's coming from your company that people in the audience may not know yet. This is your chance to kind of do a little bit of a commercial, number one, but more importantly, a peek behind the curtain for what might be happening that might get everybody excited.
Sure. So we actually just announced a very large partnership with Kinetic, which for us was big. So in a nutshell, Ubimo licensed software for media planning and attribution for out-of-home, working both with media owners and agencies. So we just did a very large deal with Kinetic and announced it last week. So this is kind of like maybe not what's coming, but what just came, which is always good. And what's coming soon is, we spoke a lot about attribution today. So one of our issues with attribution so far is that attribution in the industry today is very much still a black box. So you do a report, you get a study 4 weeks after in a PDF, you need to believe in it. We're basically, I think it's the first time we're announcing it, right? We're announcing a fully self-service platform that will allow you basically in real time to run attribution studies and customize the data, and it will not be a black box anymore. So yeah, thanks for the 30 seconds.
I mean, I think for us, and you know, I think it's doing more better. in terms of what we're already doing. And we have a suite of campaign impact measurement products that help measure the ROI and kind of the goals of brands, right? And doing that in a very in a very specific way. So for digital events, right, driving to to a website, actually driving basket size, driving registrations, it's actually using the programmatic ecosystem of our partner Place Exchange to actually measure that based on the device IDs that partner has, and being able to provide that. Depending on the length of the campaign, it could actually be during the campaign, not just after the campaign, so really helping to do that. And then certainly foot traffic and brand awareness, but really I think the digital event at the bottom of the funnel is really important. I think also, we talked about storytelling. If you think about, as we're talking to creative agencies and marketers, along with our specialist partners, it's encouraging them to think about the creative process at the beginning, about how to extend that in out of home and tell stories, and use location and audience as a context of those stories. I thought it was interesting. We saw Amazon, talk about specific boards. But how do you tell stories in different neighborhoods? How do you tell stories based on people who are going different places and their tastes and trends and things that way? So how does that impact storytelling? So we're going to keep doing more and better, and also making sure that the digital buyers and digital agencies understand that if you're GroupM's a great example. They're buying they're thinking about video agnostically, but they're still not thinking about out of home video. So making sure that we're educating them that how to buy video on the street level, and how can you engage in that. So again, more, better.
Yeah, for Volta, it continues to be a growth story. That's a big deal for us. I mean, our biggest handicap is we're still not as big as the big guys. So I would say growth and interactivity on our station. So those of you who maybe haven't seen our new station on the expo floor, we're extremely proud of our new design. We're at about 1,500 faces nationwide, across maybe 12 markets, but our growth this year, going from 1,500 to probably 2,500 faces, is all up and down the East Coast. So Atlanta, DC, New York, Boston. That is a big deal to us because the EV movement out east isn't quite what it is out west. And the question in LA is how many people own an EV, and in the conference room you might get 2 or 3 people. In New York, it's how many have a car. And there's a big gap between the understanding of that. And while we're still here to say we have great media value because of our placement, that is the halo that we're looking for, is that extra that differentiates us from a commoditized screen. And then the interactivity of our, people often ask, are they touch screens or is there volume? And those are things we are not interested in. But again, with the mobile device, NFC technology where you tap to open up an experience. Again, with the mobile device, we've talked to AR vendors where you look at the Volta station through your phone in an AR experience and an entire brand experience can open up. And those are things that we think are sort of next generation for us.
Thank you guys so much. So to Michael, Mike, and Gilad, thank you all, and thank you all for being here today.
Thanks.